Hello, I'd like to work through a couple examples of adding and subtracting decimals. The first example, I'm going to subtract a decimal number from a whole number. And the reason I like to start here is because subtracting a decimal number from whole numbers tends to be a skill that students have struggled with when they first start learning how to add and subtract decimals. As always, whenever we're dealing with decimals, I love to use and reference a place value chart. When I write these numbers in my place value chart, the 4 belongs in the ones place, since this is 4 wholes. And then a 1 in 35 hundredths, we have a 1 in the ones place, a 3 in the tenths, and a 5 in the hundredths place. This lets us see that it's very important to set up our decimal subtraction problem by lining up the digits that are in each of our place values. So the ones are lined up, the tenths are lined up, and the digits in the hundredths are lined up. And so we'll take our cue from the place value chart and set up our problem in a similar way. But remember that nothing in math is expressed as the number 0. And so 4 wholes here does not have any value in the tenths place or the hundredths place. And it's very important to add these zeros because it reminds us that we will still need to borrow even when we're subtracting decimal numbers. Because if we start in the hundredths place right here, we can see we only have, we don't have any hundredths. And that means we can't take 5 hundredths away. We can't take 5 away of something we don't have any of. So I'm going to go to the tenths place and see if I can borrow a tenth, because I know I can break a tenth up into 10 hundredths. But unfortunately, in this problem, I don't have any tenths either. That means I need to first go to the ones place. I'm going to borrow from the 4 to get some tenths. Once I have some tenths, then I'll be able to borrow some tenths and have enough hundredths to take 5 of those hundredths away. When I take or borrow 1 whole from 4 wholes, I'm simply left with 3 wholes. Now I'm going to take the 1 whole that I borrowed from here and regroup it as 10 tenths. Now I have the tenths I need so I can create some hundredths. 1 tenth is all I need, so that'll leave us with 9 tenths. And 1 tenth regroups as 10 hundredths. Now I have enough hundredths that I can subtract. 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 3 is 6. And 3 minus 1 is 2. But keep in mind that this is 10 hundredths minus 5 hundredths. So our value 5 in our answer is 5 hundredths. We have 9 tenths, subtract 3 tenths. So this 6 is 6 tenths. And we have 3 wholes, subtract 1 whole, which leaves us with 2 wholes. Now I say all this to remind you guys that a decimal point is needed in a number when we have a whole number part and a decimal number part. The decimal separates the wholes from the parts. Now there's a way that we can check to see if our answer 2 and 65 hundredths is correct. And that is to add our difference, 2 and 65 hundredths, to the number that we took away from 4, 1 and 35 hundredths. When we add decimal numbers, we still need to be really careful that we are lining our digits up. And so we can see from writing these numbers in our place value chart that we need to line these numbers up in our problem just like they are in the place value chart. So the wholes are with the wholes, the tenths are with the tenths, and the hundredths are with the hundredths. Our goal is to add these up and get 4 as the answer, because that'll let us know that we subtracted correctly. And we add just like we would add whole numbers. 5 added to 5 is 10, and we have to carry the 1. 1 plus 3 is 4, and when we add that to 6, we get 10 again. We still need to carry the 1. 1 added to 1 added to 2 is 4. And just like I mentioned in our last problem here, we need a decimal point to separate the whole number part from the decimal part. And the good news is we did get 4 as our sum when we added 1 and 35 hundredths and 2 and 65 hundredths. So key takeaways. Make sure that you recognize where a decimal point comes in a whole number. Now this can be confusing for students at first because usually when we see a whole number, and especially in everyday life when we see a whole number, we usually don't see a decimal point. So if I were to write the number 17, maybe I have 17 avocados and I want to send a text message letting you know I have lots of avocados. I'm probably not going to send my text message as 17 decimal point. But recognizing that a decimal point can always be written after the ones place is helpful if we're going to be adding or subtracting a decimal to the whole number 17. So recognizing where a decimal can be written in a whole number is very important. The other key takeaway is to make sure that when we subtract or add decimal numbers, that we're lining our digits up based on place value. And all that means is our tens are on top of each other, our ones are stacked on top of each other, and the same with the tenths and the hundredths. The third thing I'll mention is sometimes it's helpful to add zeros in places where there's no value. That can help you remember that you need to borrow in this situation. It can also help keep these digits lined up. So I hope that these two examples have helped. I hope the tips help to keep in mind when you're practicing either in the classroom or at home.